we must ask, what is it there for? What came before it? Because we know he's now going to begin to answer that question, how do I make the most of the rest of my life? So gosh, it's really important. And what it really is that chapter 1 to 11 of Romans is what's going on over here. It's Paul saying, in view of those chapters 1 to 11, everything that I've taught, all the doctrine, all the truths, all the corrections, all the theology, the foundations, all of that, in view of that, that's what he means by therefore. You may ask, so what is that? And simply, we need to just page back one page. And I'm going to read us the last few verses of chapter 11 because it's something outstanding. In the NIV, it's called the doxology, which I can't quite figure what it is. But really, it's a spontaneous burst out of liturgic worship towards God. So Paul was busy explaining this for 11 chapters, and then at the end, he can't hold himself anymore. And he goes like this, oh, the depth of the riches of wisdom. We can't move here. Thank you very much. Oh, the depths of the riches of wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For him and through him and for him. From him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. This is not a doctrinal statement. This is a man who has seen something and he cannot keep quiet. That's what's going on with Paul over here. 11 chapters explaining what God has done. And by the end of them, Paul isn't explaining anything anymore. He's marveling. Oh, the depths of the riches and so forth. It is marvelous. Only then, after that, does he say, therefore. Are you getting this? Paul is overwhelmed with the reflection on, and in chapter 12, the second part of the first sentence says, in view of God's mercies. So he sums up everything that comes from chapter 1 to 11. It is, have a clear view of God's mercy. I'm not going to hold back on the answer to the question we're asking today, but the hint is there. It's having God's mercy in full view of your life. That's how we live for the rest of our lives. Well, at age 9, I was alone on a bus. In an instant, I was feeling overwhelmed with, on the one hand, being lost and separated from God, needing God, and on the other hand, being loved by Jesus and invited to live a life that's run by him. And in that moment, 9 years old, I responded, I went to my knees and invited Jesus to take charge of my life. I didn't decide to become religious. Didn't even know what religion was. I saw something, and therefore I responded. Linda Oakley, it's a story, and I'm just reading this to get through it quickly, spent years longing to be a minister, a missionary, and felt the call of God to that, and years being disappointed, divorce, singleness, a whole lot of life things happened. A dream, a calling of God was just kind of drifting away and not happening, and then God did it. Rio de Janeiro, working with the children living on the street, could have been Kitwe. At some point in time, she met up with a bunch of women and shared. And one of them, a pastor's wife, sat and listened attentively to her story. And the next morning, with tears in her eyes, she came up and said, last night, I reflected, and for years and years, I've resisted to join my husband on missionary work. But the Lord has broken through my resistance, and therefore, I'm ready to follow my husband into missionary service. It's something that you see and that has impacted you and has changed your behavior. You see that? It's beautiful. She didn't decide to be willing. She tried that before, I'm sure, in conversations with her husband. But something broke through and willingness followed. Therefore. So friends, can you remember your moment? Some of you can remember a day, and some of you may remember a bus or a place. Some of you can remember both, and some of us cannot remember at all. Some of us that are sitting here this morning have not ever had that moment at all. And you are simply here because someone asked you, or you are here out of habit, or you are here because recently life has just knocked the wind out of you and you find nowhere else to go at this point in time. And I want to say you're welcome. I want to say you don't need to have a moment to listen in on this one. It's just great to have you here as we go on. Next slide, please. So Paul says, in view of God's mercy. So let's put that in view. Why should mercy be the thing that everything else stands on? And I think there are many reasons, but let's chip through 3 of those reasons. And the first one is the ground, and the other 2 are built on it. So here is the first one, because we have received mercy. Paul has been already very blunt earlier in the chapters in Romans, particularly in Romans 3, for example, where he says, there is no one righteous, not even one. No one who understands, no one who seeks God. All have turned away. Everybody, by heart, by nature, rebelling against God, gone. Now, sometimes when we talk about mercy, we separate that from the concept of grace. And I think that can actually be quite helpful. So grace is being treated far better than what you deserve. So for example, you write an exam and you fail. And the teacher doesn't have to do that, but they come to you and say, listen, I'm going to give you another chance. That's grace. Where mercy is being treated with compassion when you are down and out, when you are in pain, when you are in need, and you are not able to do anything about it. And we need both. We need grace and we need mercy. We are both guilty and need grace, and we are worn out and we need mercy. And here is what God actually did with that. And in Romans 5, verse 6 to 8, it goes like this. You see, just at the right time, when we were still sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. This is profound, folks. God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were sinners, Christ died for us. That means you and I done squat. Nothing. Zilch. Nada. Not lifted a finger. And God has done everything that is necessary for us to be his. He didn't do it to impress. He did not do it for people who had cleaned themselves while we were still sinners. Without this mercy, we would be completely lost and bound, and without hope, we will be without a future. And that is exactly that change. We are no longer lost, but we are found. We are no longer bound, but we are free. We have hope and life because God is 100% for you and for me. This is not a reward. Grace and mercy is not a reward for a life well lived. that, friends, is the ground that we stand on. God has extended his mercy, undeserved, towards us, without us having to do a single thing. Next one. Romans 15 kind of speaks of arguments Paul have made earlier, where the Jews have argued they're better than the rest of the world because Jesus was a Jew. And Paul has refuted and argued around that and demonstrated a Jew, and God loved the Jews as well. Through that in Romans chapter 15, verse 89, when he kind of sum up that argument, and he says that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy. Friends, this is really important. God sent his son Jesus so that the nations may be amazed at his mercy. That's the reason we exist. To make people marvel at the mercy of God. To live in such a way that people looking at your life can only reach one conclusion. God is merciful. Making the most of our lives look something like that. And no, we don't get it right most of the time. But when we do, God is glorified and we amplify his mercy. Third one, next slide please. We live out mercy. How do we live out this mercy that we have received from God? Well, the rest of Romans chapter 12 actually tells us all about this. So if you want a little bit of homework, go and dip into the rest of Romans chapter 12. But I'll just pick out a few of the phrases and things that come out of here and see if you can pick up a pattern. Acts of mercy, do them. Genuinely love people. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Bless those who persecute you. Weep with those who weep. Associate with the lowly. Repay no one with evil. Never avenge yourself. And if your enemy is hungry, feed him. Spot the thing? Every single one of those is mercy going out. Is showing mercy from people who've had mercy coming in. Paul, in view of God's mercy. By God's great mercy, oh man, I can love these people, whether they deserve it or not. Which is why what we do here at Silklife, the food bank, the baby bank, the period bank, the clothes bank, the community hub, this is not charity work bolted onto the church stuff that we do over here. It is the church that has received mercy, boom, and mercy is flowing out. It is the Atkinson's family that has received mercy, boom. Therefore, when they go to Zambia, they don't just go on 5-star hotels and holidays and big steaks. I could tell you stories about those ones. I give you bad food poisoning sometimes. It is impacted by God in some way that breaks your heart for others. It changed your life. It comes from the inside. So what does that actually look? And this is where your finger can pick back to Ephesians chapter 4. I haven't had time. Ephesians chapter 4 is beautiful. The nice thing here is it's Paul writing that as well. So in Romans chapter 12, Paul gives us the principles. And if you can remember Romans chapter 12, that first verse we read, it says, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. And it goes on to say, don't conform to the pattern of this world. So I have to point out a few patterns, because as we go on to make the most of our life as Jesus followers, I think it's really important that we spot patterns. We can discern patterns, because it says here in the book, do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. So let's take those two. Paul is actually quite intentional about this. In Ephesians, he unpacks those principles that is set up in Romans chapter 12. Same person writing them. Principles and now practice. He starts off with, we see Ephesians 4, 17 to 19. I'm going to read this for us and we'll pick out through the others to make up some time. So I tell you this, in things and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. So basically, that means don't live any longer as if you were not a Christ follower, in short. They are darkening in their understanding. They are separate from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Hard hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. And watch the order in which Paul described this pattern of the world. He starts with the thinking, it's futile. Then he goes, the understanding, it's darkened. Then he goes, the heart, it's hardened. Then he goes, the sensitivity is lost. And then last of all, the body, given over, indulging, greed. You see that? It's the mind, and it goes through everything, the heart, and it ends up in the body. Mind first, body last. That's the pattern of the world. And it's precisely the opposite of the pattern that Paul is proposing in Romans chapter 12. I had to chew on this, but it's true, and we can see it over here. Paul tells us instead to run things the other way around. Offer your bodies, then be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Let's look at these two from Ephesians chapter 4 and see what does that look like. But before we do that, quick reminder, it's all in view of God's mercy, right? None of this is in work harder, push harder, try harder. So we go for Ephesians 4. That's the next slide, please. Yeah, this is good. The previous one is that's one. Yeah, thanks, proceed. Ephesians 4:22-24. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off old self, which is being corrupted and its deceitful desires, and to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. So what Paul isn't saying over here is offer your minds. He says offer your bodies, and then immediately be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now what I've tried to do is just in the next slide, please. We're on slide 9 now. I think we've missed the table already, haven't we? Up the next one. Thank you. There you go. It's a bit of a table over here. But remember what we are working with over here is offer your bodies. And as you go, and I again would say homework, read Ephesians 4 if you want to find more practical detail. I'm just distilling this from it for you. So in terms of body, look at that. There's different parts of the body that's been mentioned in different sections of that scripture following. For example, look at what happens when the body gets offered. Offer your body. The mouth. Say mouth. It used to be the fastest weapon that you own. A word that puts someone back in their place. A version of the story that came out flattering you. Offer it to God. It becomes one thing that gets somebody else, a thing that gets somebody else through the worst morning of their week. The hands. Show me your hands, folks. Show me your hands. Yes, we are in the body over here. It's practical. Hands that took. Hands that stole. Time, credit, things that weren't theirs to take. Offered. They work honestly. And then they give away what they have in excess in return. The heart. You touch your heart if you want to follow the pattern. The heart is a hard one. The heart that keeps an account of what people have done wrong against you. And if we're honest, most of us in this room could name who is on that list. Paul says, offer it. What does that look like? Forgiveness. Not because the debt wasn't real, but because it has been on the receiving end of exactly that, in view of God's great mercy. I've been forgiven much. This is not abstract, folks. It's your mouth refusing to gossip, your hands helping instead of taking. It's our feet walking towards the person you have been avoiding. It's your ears staying tuned when you would normally zone out. It is your eyes turning away from what you shouldn't look at. Nothing on this slide, friends, cost you nothing. Everything cost us. It's a sacrifice. Nothing is achieved, this is also important, by trying harder. That is why Paul says, in view of God's mercy, oh man, truth and encouragement from the mouth, honest work and generosity from the hands, kindness and forgiveness from in view of God's mercy. That's beautiful. Think about an old telephone. David's used the one before, this illustration of an operating system. So you've got your phone, I guess maybe you have an Android operating system. Imagine you trade that phone, or you take it to some tech person and they get it back to you, and all of a sudden it's an iOS and Apple operating system. That phone works different, right? It looks different, it works different. That's what's happening in view of God's mercy when God comes into our lives and changes us. You can change the wallpaper. That is behavioral modification. It will last maybe 2 weeks. Paul isn't talking about wallpapers here. He's talking about a new operating system where he says, transforming of our minds. Everything runs differently because of the thing underneath it change. Next one, please. Yeah, let's hang on to that one. Again, summarize the same things from Ephesians chapter 4. Just have a little look at that middle column. What does a renewed mindset look like? And an old mindset. A renewed mindset is truth builds God's family. Anger serves righteousness. God gives so I can give. Words are gifts, and God has forgiven me. That's a new mindset. Those are the verses, just so that you can slightly believe that. It comes from Ephesians 3. Folks, this is where renewal happens. Paul is not saying try harder at column, that column over here. No, he's not saying that. He's saying see differently. Different from column 1. The old mindset, different. That's what transforming means. Personal example, in recent months, a senior manager at work made a couple of very distressing decisions that affected me personally and professionally quite badly. I was right and they were wrong, according to the facts. I had a reason to be bitter. Bitterness justified. But following a very difficult conversation, I forgave him, and he confessed and apologized. And what shifted wasn't the day I decided to stop being bitter. I've tried that many times. I've tried that. What happened was that I saw properly what God forgave me for. And then all of a sudden, okay, this is nothing compared to what God forgave me for. In view of God's mercy, the mind, I thank God in this instance, has changed for me. Bitterness is justified to God has forgiven me. Let me say one thing carefully here, and this is important, we're coming closely now. Because Paul says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, and some of us here are actually in a week where that could be very difficult. It could land quite hard. You are in a place of mourning and bitterness. And I just want to say that Paul is not saying over here, he's not talking about raw anger of loss, for example, or bad news. The Bible has entire books speaking to that. And God is not remotely nervous about that. And he's talking about the anger we have decided to keep, the bitterness we've decided to hang onto. Let me take one more. Take what benefits me. Maybe that's a pattern, the old mind in your life. I had a wonderful story this week. I have to read it for you. I have a wonderful story that demonstrates this. In a very poor neighborhood on the outskirts of Cape Town, A pensioner went to his local automatic teller machine to withdraw his monthly pension, cash society, about £100, 2,000 rands. And at the end of the transaction, the machine returned his card, but no money. He walked away very sad and hopeless. The very next person at the ATM, however, discovered that the withdrawn cash sat right there in the machine. The old mindset, now you decide what you would have done. The old mindset, yeah, I know it hurts. The old mindset would be that he just kept the money. But a new mindset caused this person, also a pensioner, to search high and low for the poor gentleman, the unfortunate pensioner. And after 2 weeks and a social media campaign, he found the original guy and gave him his 2,000 rand. And the joy was great. And I know it's not perfect, but somehow it illustrates the old mindset that has been renewed in view of God's mercy. I've received so much from God. It's beautiful. Lying protects me. No. Truth builds the family. Anger gives me power. No. Anger serves righteousness, never revenge. Words are weapons. No. Words are gifts. How do I change? Never by trying harder. Again, it's look at what you and I have been given. I'm coming to a close, folks, and maybe I can ask Luke, would you guys come up? Thank you. So we're coming back here to the question, how do I make the most of the rest of my life? And the answer clearly is not to squeeze more out of it. Remember where we started earlier this morning. 11 chapters in, Paul burst out, oh, the depths of riches. That is not a technique. That is a man who saw something. So here is the answer. Keep marveling. This morning, the songs that we sang, that I really thank God for the band, particularly Luke, that chose some of these songs. These songs felt uncomfortably intimate at certain points for some of us this morning, about the beauty of God, marveling at God, about finding joy in His presence, never wanting to leave it. Folks, that's what it means in view of God's mercy. There are some practical places which help us to keep things in view. It's reading your scripture. Study it. Let God show you. It's prayer. Walk in faith. Trust Him for everything. Lean on Him, not on our own understanding. Yes. It's worship. Wow. Marvel. Enjoy. Take the joy of loving God and being loved by Him. Show mercy. Show mercy. Because mercy is given. One of the best ways mercy received stays real to you. Community, being together as a church, connect to others because we inspire one another. Look, hey, your eyes are off. Look at Jesus. Look at the mercy of God. Man, we can't carry on the way that we do. These are just 4 ways to live a life to its full extent. Jesus told the story of a man who found a treasure. I'm not going to read that in Matthew 13 verse 46. But he found that treasure on a field, immediately buried it, went away, sold everything, and for the joy that is in him, he bought that field. And that is what it is to encounter Jesus. That is beautiful. Nothing else matters. It becomes shadows in the light of the beauty of God's mercy. It's not grinding your teeth. It's not making new resolutions, friends. He had seen what was in that field, and therefore everything else became easy to let go of. I want to make 2 invitations, and very practical. The first one is get involved. Mercy given helps to keep mercy received real. And If you want to be involved in the food bank, if you want to be involved in the hub, if you want to be involved in anything around the church, please come and speak to someone that you've seen here this morning. And then finally, there might be someone that says, I've never received this mercy. And this is a moment that you've never had. And friends, you can have it today. And come and find me afterwards. There's a space over here for us to pray. Nothing would make me happier. Nothing would make me happier to introduce you to Jesus. We're going to sing now. And this is an invitation to do simply this. Marvel at His mercies. Would you stand with me and with the band just for a moment? Let's marvel together. Thank you.